Hey everybody, I'm Couchman. I'm a senior fellow in fiscal policy at Americans for Prosperity. I served for 6 years as a congressional staffer, so I may be the only person here who hasn't given up on Congress yet. But either way, I'm here to talk about my thoughts on the optimal design for a balanced budget amendment and then implementing legislation for that. It turns out that it's perfect for Barry to have talked about the Swiss system before I talk about what I think makes sense, because essentially it's an adaptation of what the Swiss already do highly successfully, but for the United States. And it starts with a principles-based balanced budget amendment or fiscal responsibility amendment. I've written 2 bipartisan balanced budget amendments for the Freedom Caucus members that I worked for, and I keep writing longer and longer things about this. I'm working on a book now. But what do we mean about a principles-based BBA? Well, it's very different from those that have gotten votes in Congress. I have an op-ed out on the table that you can check out that walks through some of the issues that traditional BBAs have had. So this is kind of the political context for any sort of constitutional amendment. You heard Mr. Cuccinelli talk about how there's more kind of Republican-leaning states and Democratic-leaning states. In fact, there are 13 D+5 or more Democratic states. There are 23 R+5 or more Republican states. But we still need to get everyone between R+25 Wyoming and D+5 Oregon to agree on the same balanced budget amendment text, whether that's through a convention or a series of conventions in the states or through the legislatures. So that's not easy. The way to go about doing that is to, again, take a lesson from Switzerland. There's 111 words in their constitutional provision. It passed by initiative with 85% of the people supporting it. It's principles. I'll read number 1, not the rest of it. But the Confederation shall maintain its income and expenditure in balance over time. What does that mean? That is ambiguous as all get out, right? But that's okay, because they went ahead and they put the details in statute, and that's why it works so well. In the United States, this is an adaptation of the principles-based BBA that I wrote for Congressman Dave Bratt. It was first introduced in 2015. This is a somewhat tighter version. First sentence is, expenditures and receipts shall be balanced, which may occur over more than 1 year. Very similar to the Swiss, not directly inspired, but convergent evolution works sometimes. So this is all principles. The reason for that is that the Constitution, it's pretty much all principles. The idea is that things should work for all time to come. In state constitutional amendments, they're easier to change, so you can be a little more specific, but given how hard it is to do a federal constitutional amendment, you really want it to be something that can last for hundreds of years, potentially. Okay, implementing legislation is where the rubber meets the road with this. Congress has to write that. Obviously, it's a lower threshold. It's a simple majority in the House, 60 votes in the Senate, and the president's signature. I want to spend most of the rest of our time talking about definitions. No, I'm kidding. It's really important, but it's really boring. We're not going to do that. The main mechanism that I do want to spend a little time on is what Robert Ordway from Senator Braun's office mentioned, the Responsible Budget Targets Act. And that's kind of an adaptation of the Swiss version, but also a little bit different, because I've also run the numbers on the Swiss version for the US, and it's a little choppier in terms of the policies that would result from that. And then enforcement is the last thing that I want to touch on. The main thing to think about is that you want to avoid annual balance. That's what most BBAs aim for, but revenue is always moving up and down. It's really volatile. It creates a lot of policy instability if you're trying to match spending to revenue on an annual basis. The Responsible Budget Targets Act doesn't do that. Senator Braun has introduced this along with Congressman Tom Emmer, the outgoing chair of the NRCC, and the incoming House Majority Whip. Like I said, it's basically the Swiss debt break for the US. It allows spending to grow with a 5-year rolling average of GDP. So that smooths out all those fluctuations really nicely. If there's a deficit, then it slows down the growth rate just a little bit. If there's another deficit, it slows it down a little bit more. When there are surpluses, it rebounds to that rolling average, but not above it. And then for emergency spending, you don't have to offset anything immediately. You just take care of your people are hurting, you got to respond. But what you have to do instead is you have to offset that over the subsequent 6 years. And so that kind of disciplines the emergency spending because it's going to come out of somebody's hide in the future if it's not actually related to the emergency spending. So it kind of keeps it more tightly committed to that. And then when you pair that with the principles-based BBA that sets a supermajority of 2/3 of both houses for emergency spending, then that really makes sure that it's reserved for the time when it's needed. This is what it looks like, or would have looked like if it had been in place since 2000. This is billions of dollars, so started at a little above $1 trillion and kept on going. But the blue line's revenue, the orangish tangerine line is actual spending, and then the green line is what the Responsible Budget Targets Act would have looked like, assuming the revenue. You can see that it's a very smooth spending growth line, and it would really stabilize spending as a percentage of GDP. Of course, Congress could spend a heck of a lot less, and that'd be great, but that's the base case. If we were to adopt it starting with this fiscal year that just started 2 months ago, then you'd see a nice glide path from where we would be going to, primary balance. In the statutory case here, it's based on primary balance, which doesn't include net interest, just because that's more reasonable to try to get to as an interim step, and then we can go to full balance after that at some point. Enforcement. There's a couple of different pieces. I just wrote an opinion article about a debt limit deal that could make sense, but members of Congress hate voting on the debt limit. Has anyone ever worked for a member or talked to a member about the debt limit vote? It's like the worst thing. They hate it. If there's a way that you could say that you don't have to vote on the debt limit as long as you stick to the budget targets, a lot of members would be encouraged to stick to the budget targets. The next thing is a real budget. It came up earlier that Congress doesn't do a budget. It doesn't. Congress has never done a real budget with all spending and all revenue. That would give them more opportunities to figure out how to actually balance the budget. And then third, the way that automatic enforcement works in the US at the federal level just doesn't work. There's a better way of doing that. I'm short on time, so I'm going to skip that. Here's my contact information. That is, in fact, my license plate. It's BBA guy. Like I said, I'm pretty interested in this stuff. So thank you very much.